This is Scott the Fix-It Guy. Today we have a refrigerator that's leaking. So there's water that's leaking from the freezer down into the refrigerator section. We're going to be fixing it. Pretty easy to do. We're going to be removing this back panel. We got the shelves out already, and I'm removing 3 screws here that are holding in this back sheet metal panel. These are just 1/4 inch screws, and definitely want to have your machine unplugged. I'm going to pull this toward me. I'm removing this little ground wire, and then this panel comes right off. And now I can get to this drip pan. This drip pan has a bunch of ice in it, and it's not letting the melted water, the melted ice that comes down from the evaporator above it, to drain out. So the water just kind of finds its way around and into the refrigerator section. So I'm going to clear out all of this ice. I'm using a little paint scraper to help me, and that's just to break up the ice so I can get these sheets out. Now I have some boiling water in my cup on the left hand side. I use a turkey baster, and I'm going to push it down into this hole. This hole is where the water is supposed to drain down to the bottom of the refrigerator to a drip pan. But because there's ice in there, it's blocking it. So this method is used to melt that ice, probably about maybe 1/2 inch worth of ice down in that tube. So I'm squirting the hot water, and then I pull up the lukewarm water and put it in the cup on the right. I just want to get all that tepid water out of there. And then I'm going to grab some more boiling hot water from the cup on the left, and I'm going to introduce that into that hole so it melts more and more of that ice block. And I kind of push the water back and forth with the turkey baster, and eventually that hot water just keeps taking more and more of the ice away until that line is clear, and then water can flow down through a tube down into the evaporator pan on the bottom, and it solves the problem. It may take up to even 10 cycles like we're doing here, where you use hot water, remove the lukewarm water, and introduce hot water again. I think this time it took maybe 3 or 4 cycles, but depends how much ice is built up in there. So it's a pretty common problem, and it's a result of the heating element that's just above where this hole is getting a bit weak, and it doesn't introduce enough heat during the defrost cycle to melt all the ice, and some of the ice builds up down in this hole. So the way to cure this first is to remove the ice, and then use this method to remove the ice block down in the hole. But then what we do is we use a piece of copper wire to bring the heat from the heating element down. So that's all clear now. I could hear the water flow. So I have a piece of copper wire. I'm going to basically get it to be about 2.5 inches long, and I'm going to put a little bend on it at the end, and then I'll hook that over. I'm just eyeballing now how far I have to cut the wire, but I'm going to eyeball that, get that cut properly, and then I'll hook that over the heating element, which is the kind of black looking thick wire that goes on the horizontal plane. I'll hook it over that, and then let that dangle down into that hole. And what it'll do is it'll introduce heat down into that hole during the cycle, and that'll keep that from icing up. So I'm just looping it over that heating element and then letting it dangle down into that hole. You don't want to go down very far into that hole, like only about 1/4 inch would be great. Too far down, it's introducing heat into plastic, which you don't want. This is just going down just into the metal, and that's going to keep that from icing up. So that solves the problem. Now we just put things back together. We put the back panel back in. We're going to put the green wire, the ground wire, back onto the panel, and then we'll just use some screws to zip that panel back in. So almost any kind of freezer that's leaking water is having this same problem, where that little hole is just blocked with ice. And if you clear that ice, it'll work great. Sometimes it'll reoccur if your freezer settings are too high or if the defrost heater is getting a bit weak. But you can do the same procedure where you bring a wire to introduce heat down into that hole. So putting that screw in, and then this is the bottom plate. It goes into position, and there's a couple screws in the back that hold this in. This is actually a really good refrigerator. These are a bit older. This is probably maybe 12 to 15 years old. But they're very simple and they work really well. And this whole thing will only take you about 20 minutes and you'll be done. It is good to use that copper wire method though, just so it doesn't reoccur. The defrost heater kicks in and melts that ice about every 8 to 9 hours. So got that back. We're going to plug it in, turn the refrigerator setting to the factory position, and that did the trick. I hope that's helpful to you and gets yours going, and please subscribe when you get a chance. Thanks for watching.